I sat at the far end of the long table, the wood polished to a mirror finish that showed my own reflection looking back at me, pale and uncertain. Across from me sat my brother Julian, who is currently checking his platinum watch for the third time in 10 minutes. My father Arthur sat at the head, his posture as rigid as a military officer's, his eyes fixed on the door where the family attorney would soon appear. My grandfather, Silas Thorne, had been a man of immense complexity and even greater wealth. To the public, he was a ruthless industrialist, a man who had built a shipping and logistics empire out of sheer willpower. But to me, he was the man who taught me how to prune a rose bush without catching the thorns and how to listen to the wind. Before a storm, when the lawyer, a dry man named Mr. Sterling, finally entered, the tension in the room reached a fever pitch. He didn't offer pleasantries. He simply opened a thick leather portfolio and began to read. Of the real estate holdings and a controlling interest in the primary firm, an inheritance valued in the hundreds of millions. My mother, who sat beside him with a look of practiced mourning, was left a substantial trust that ensured she would never have to want for anything. Then Mr. Sterling paused. "Until Lena Thorne," Mr. Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave. Tarnished brass key in a small weathered leather pouch. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly, and opened the pouch. Inside was a single coin, a silver dollar from the late 1800s, and a note that simply said, "Spend it wisely." My brother let out a sharp, jagged laugh. My father didn't even look at me. He was already discussing tax implications with the lawyer. The message was clear. In their eyes, I had been dismissed. I had been given the equivalent of a tip for a job poorly done. I was the quiet one, the uncomplicated daughter, the one who didn't fight for a seat at the corporate table. And apparently, my grandfather had agreed with their assessment, but as I held that silver coin, I felt something strange. It wasn't just metal. It felt heavy with intent. He didn't do things just to be cruel, and he certainly didn't do things without a plan. I remembered him telling me once, during a summer afternoon in his garden, that the loudest voice in the room is rarely the one carrying the truth. He told me that power is often hidden in the things people overlook because they're too busy staring at the sun. I looked at the coin again. Under the dim light of the law office, I noticed a series of tiny, almost microscopic engravings along the rim. They weren't part of the original minting. They were hand-carved, tiny notches and symbols that looked like a code dot an hour later. I was walking down the street, the wind biting at my coat, feeling the weight of my family's laughter behind me. I just kept walking until I reached the one place my grandfather had always insisted on visiting himself rather than sending an assistant. It was a small, nondescript building on the edge of the financial district, a private vault facility that didn't even have a sign on the door. I walked inside, the silence of the lobby echoing the silence of my own heart. I approached the desk and placed the brass key and the silver coin on the counter. The man behind the glass didn't look like a typical bank teller. He was older, with eyes that seemed to see through walls. He picked up the coin, pulled a jeweler's loop from his pocket, and examined the rim. He didn't say a word. When the doors opened, we were in a room filled with stainless steel boxes. He led me to a large floor-to-ceiling locker and stepped back. He said you were the only one who wouldn't try to sell the coin before checking the rim. I inserted the brass key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying heavy click. When the door swung open, I didn't find gold bars or stacks of cash. Instead, I found a series of ledgers, a collection of cold storage digital wallets, and a letter. The letter was written in my grandfather's bold, unapologetic hand. It began, "Elena, if you are reading this, it means you stayed. Your father and brother think they have inherited my empire, but they have only inherited my ghosts. They have the buildings and the titles, but those are things that can be taken away by a bad market or a better rival. What is in this room is the true foundation. These ledgers represent the silent partnerships I've held for 40 years, companies and innovations that the world hasn't even heard of yet. The digital keys will give you access to a fund that exists outside the reach of Thorne and Associates. It is yours. Not because you are a thorn, but because you are you. Do not let them make you small. Do not let them convince you that your silence is a weakness. It is your greatest weapon. I sat on the floor of that vault and cried. Not because of the wealth, which, as I later realized, dwarfed the millions left to my brother, but because someone had finally seen me. My grandfather had known that if he left me this money in the public will, my family would have found a way to litigate it away from me. They would have claimed I was incompetent or manipulated. By leaving me nothing in the eyes of the world, he had given me everything in secret. He had given me the chance to build a life on my own terms, far away from their shadows, but secrets have a way of breathing. It took exactly 6 months for the first crack to appear. I had moved out of the city, buying a modest but beautiful piece of land in a coastal town where I could finally start the design firm I had always dreamed of. I wasn't flashy with my wealth. I didn't buy a fleet of cars or a penthouse. I invested in people. I invested in local artisans and sustainable tech and things that mattered. But my brother Julian, whose inheritance was tied up in a company that was beginning to struggle under his arrogant management, started digging. He couldn't understand how I was able to fund my new life. He assumed I must have stolen something, or that the lawyer had made a mistake. One evening, as the sun was setting over the ocean, a black sedan pulled into my driveway. They didn't even wait for me to invite them in. They pushed past me into my small sunlit studio, their eyes darting around at the blueprints and the high-end equipment. Where did the money come from, Elena? Julian demanded, his face with a mixture of anger and desperation. You're spending millions on these community projects. Grandpa didn't leave you anything but a coin and a key. What did you find in that vault? I stood by the window, feeling a strange sense of calm. The fear I used to feel in their presence had evaporated. He left me exactly what I needed, I said quietly. We're your family, my father added, his voice low and threatening. If there was more to the estate, it belongs to the firm. It belongs to the Thorne legacy. You're hiding assets that should have been split. We're prepared to take this to court, Elena. We will make your life a misery until you hand over what belongs to us. I looked at my father, the man who had spent my entire life looking through me as if I were made of glass. I looked at Julian, who had spent his inheritance on a lifestyle he couldn't maintain and a company he was burning to the ground. The Thorne legacy, I repeated. You think the legacy is the money, but Grandpa knew the legacy was the character. He gave you the money because he knew it would show everyone who you really were, and it has. Within 6 months, you've managed to alienate your board, lose your primary shipping contracts, and now you've come to harass your sister because you've run out of other people to blame. You have no right. Julian screamed, stepping toward me. I didn't flinch. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a copy of the legal documents my grandfather had prepared. Actually, I have every right. These assets were never part of the Thorne and Associates portfolio. They were personal holdings, gifted through a private trust that was triggered the moment you laughed at me in that law office. There is a clause, Julian, a no contest clause. If either of you attempts to litigate or interfere with my life, you forfeit the remaining shares of the company you currently hold. Grandpa knew you come for me. He banked on it. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. They realized then that the quiet one had been the one holding the cards the entire time. They had been outplayed by a dead man and a daughter they had never bothered to know. They left my house that night without another word, their shadows long and pathetic in the moonlight. I watched them drive away, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly light. Years passed, and the Thorn name faded from the headlines of the financial papers. Julian lost the company just as I suspected he would, and my father retired. In a cloud of bitterness, they reached out a few times, usually when a bill was due or a debt was mounting, but I kept my boundaries firm. I didn't cut them off entirely. I ensured they had a roof over their heads, but I never allowed them back into the inner circle of my life. I had learned that blood doesn't give you a right to someone's soul. I eventually met a man who didn't know a thing about the Thorn name. He was a landscape architect who saw the world in terms of growth and light just like I did. We built a life that was quiet, beautiful, and deeply intentional. When our daughter Maya was born, I looked into her eyes and saw a spark of that. Same quiet strength my grandfather had seen in me. On Maya's 10th birthday, I took her down to the beach. The waves were crashing against the shore, and the wind was singing through the tall grass. Inside was the silver coin, its edges still carrying the secret code that had changed. My life, Maya, I said, handing it to her. I want you to have this. It's not just a coin, it's a reminder. People will try to tell you who you are. They'll try to tell you that being loud is the only way to be heard. They'll try to tell you that your worth is something they can measure in a bank account. But I want you to remember that the most important things you'll ever own are the things they can't see. She held the coin up to the light, her eyes narrowing as she noticed the tiny engravings. There are marks on it, Mommy, she whispered. I smiled, pulling her close. I know, sweetie. But for now, just remember, don't ever make yourself small for people who refuse to grow. The peace I found wasn't just in the wealth, but in the freedom from the expectations of others. My grandfather hadn't just left me a fortune, he had left me a roadmap to my own identity. He had taught me that the world is full of noise, but if you can find the quiet center, you can build a kingdom that no storm can touch. I looked out at the horizon, the sun dipping below the water, and I knew that Silas Thorne was out there somewhere, finally resting, knowing that his legacy was exactly where it was meant to be. The quiet had become my sanctuary. It was no longer a place where I was hidden, but a place where I was powerful. I continued to grow my firm, focusing on projects that breathed life into neglected spaces. I built libraries in neighborhoods that had been forgotten and parks where children could play in safety. I didn't put my name on the buildings. I didn't need the recognition. The work itself was the reward. My brother Julian eventually moved to a small apartment in a different city. He stopped calling once he realized that I wouldn't be his personal ATM. My father passed away a few years later, and at his funeral, I was struck by how few people were actually there for him. They were there for the memory of the power he once had, but not for the man himself. It was a sobering reminder of the difference between a life built on acquisition and a life built on connection. Standing at his graveside, I felt a deep resonance. He had saved me from becoming like them. He had forced me to find my own strength rather than letting me lean on his. As the years turned into decades, Maya grew into a woman of incredible grace and intelligence. She became a doctor, working in some of the most challenging environments in the world. She used the resources I provided to build clinics and train local medical staff. She was the embodiment of the responsibility my grandfather had mentioned in his letter. One evening, when I was much older, Maya came home for a visit. We were sitting on the porch, watching the fireflies dance in the garden. She pulled the silver coin from her pocket, she still carried it everywhere, and looked at me. I think I finally understand the code, Mom, she said. Do you? I asked, curious. It's not just coordinates or account numbers, is it? The symbols dot dot, they're a story. They're a map of the garden Grandpa Silas used to keep. The notches represent the rows of roses. The curves are the walking paths. I laughed, a warm feeling spreading through my chest. You're right. He always said the garden was the only place where he felt truly honest. He wanted to make sure that whatever I did with the money, I stayed connected to the earth. He wanted me to remember that everything, wealth, power, life itself, needs to be tended to with patience. Maya nodded, clutching the coin. He was a genius, wasn't he? He was a man who knew how to wait, I replied, and that is the rarest kind of genius there is. The stars were bright above us, and for a moment, the distance between the past and the present seemed to vanish. I could almost see Silas Thorne sitting in his old chair, a mischievous glint in his eye, watching us. He had planted a seed in a quiet girl many years ago, and now he was watching an entire forest grow. The $50 that my family had mocked was, in the end, the most valuable thing I had ever received. It was the price of admission to a life I loved, and it was the best bargain I had ever made. As the years drifted on, I found myself spending more time in my own garden, much like Silas had. There's something about the cycle of planting and harvesting that keeps a person humble. You can have all the money in the world, but you can't force a flower to bloom before it's ready. You have to wait. You have to nurture. You have to be present. I think that was the real secret my grandfather wanted to pass on. The wealth was just the soil. The character was the seed. I began to write down my own story, not for publication, but for those who would come after Maya. I wanted them to know that their lineage wasn't just one of industrialists and billionaires, but of observers and builders. I wanted them to know that being the quiet one in the room isn't a deficit, it's a vantage point. When you're quiet, you see the cracks in the walls before they crumble. You see the world as it is, not as people want you to believe it is. When I eventually reached the end of my own journey, I didn't leave a complicated will. I didn't leave a trail of legal battles or bitter relatives. I left everything to Maya, knowing she would continue the work. But I also left a small weathered leather pouch for her daughter, my granddaughter Silas. Inside was a single, tarnished brass key and a silver coin. And on the note, I didn't just write "spend it wisely." I added, "and never forget to listen to the quiet." The legacy of the Thorns didn't end with the collapse of the company. It didn't end with the loss of the family estate. It transformed. It became something softer, deeper, and more enduring. It became a legacy of second chances, of hidden strength, and of the profound power of a simple silver dollar. As I closed my eyes for the last time, I didn't think about the ledgers or the gold or the digital wallets. I thought about the smell of roses after a summer rain, the sound of my grandfather's voice, and the incredible, beautiful silence of a life well-lived. The transition from the old world to the new wasn't a clean break, but a slow unfurling. I remember the months after the confrontation with my father and Julian as a time of immense internal restructuring. I had spent so long defining myself in opposition to them, by how much I didn't want to be like them, that I had to learn who I was when they were at the center of my gravity. The inheritance gave me the luxury of time, but it didn't give me the answers. Those had to be found in the work dot my architectural firm, which I named the Silent Pillar, became known for a specific kind of design. We didn't do the soaring, ego-driven skyscrapers that Julian loved. We did adaptive reuse. We took old warehouses, crumbling community centers, and neglected schools and turned them into spaces that felt like they had always belonged. We used materials that aged beautifully, copper that would turn green with the sea air, stone that would wear down under the footsteps of thousands of people. I realized that my grandfather's shipping empire had moved things across the world, but my legacy would be about making people feel like they could finally stop and stay. Maya often traveled with me during those early years. She saw me negotiate with contractors who underestimated me and city council members who thought I was just a trust fund girl playing at a hobby. She saw me use the data from my grandfather's ledger's information about supply chains and local economies that was decades ahead of its time to make my projects not just beautiful, but viable. She saw that power didn't have to be a hammer. It could be a blueprint. I recall one specific project in a town not unlike Oak Haven. It was an old textile mill that had been the heartbeat of the community before it was shuttered in the 80s. The town was dying, the young people leaving as fast as they could. I bought the mill, not to tear it down and build luxury condos, but to turn it into a multi-use hub. A vocational school on the ground floor, artist studios above, and a co-op. Market in the center, the resistance was fierce. People were afraid of change, and a few local developers wanted the land for a strip mall. They tried the same tactics my father had used: intimidation, legal threats, public shaming. But I have learned from the best. I didn't fight them in the press. I didn't raise my voice. I simply used the resources I had to buy the surrounding lots, ensuring that no strip mall could ever be built there. I then sat down with the townspeople, one by one, in their kitchens and their diners, and I listened. I heard their stories of the mill, their fears for their children, and their hopes for the future. When the mill finally opened, it wasn't a Thorn project. It was their project. And that was the moment I realized I had surpassed my grandfather. He had built things for himself, even if he eventually shared them with me. I was building things that belonged to everyone. As the sun sets. On this narrative, I think back to that $50, those two crisp bills that were actually a silver coin and a brass key in disguise. I think about how easy it would have been to walk out of that lawyer's office and never look back. I could have moved to Europe, changed my name, and lived a life of leisure. But the coin wouldn't let me. It was a weight in my pocket, a constant reminder that I was part of a chain. My grandfather didn't just give me wealth. He gave me a mission. He saw the rot in his own life, the way greed had consumed his son and his grandson, and he chose me to be the antidote. He chose the one person who knew how to wait, how to listen, and how to value the small things. If you're out there feeling like the world is too loud, feeling like you're being overlooked because you don't scream for attention, I want you to look closer at what you've been given. It might look like $50. It might look like a tarnished key. It might look like nothing at all. But if you hold it up to the light, if you examine the rim, you might find that you're holding the key to a kingdom that no one else even knows exists. Life isn't a race to see who can accumulate the most. It's a journey to see who can build the most meaning. My grandfather Silas knew that at the end of his life. I knew it at the beginning of mine. And Maya knows it now. The Thorn legacy isn't written in bank statements. It's written in the lives we've touched and the gardens we've tended. And in the end, that is the only wealth that actually matters. The quiet, the silver, the key, they were just tools. The real inheritance was the permission to be myself. And that, more than any billion-dollar estate, was the greatest gift a man could ever give. I look at my hands, now aged and lined like the ledgers I once studied, and I see the same strength that was in my grandfather's grip all those years ago. I am Elena Thorne, and I have spent my $50 very, very wisely. The evening light is fading now, and the house is still. Maya's out in the world, doing her work, and Silas is asleep in her crib, dreaming of whatever babies dream of. I sit on my porch, the silver coin resting in my palm, and I listen to the wind. It's a quiet wind tonight, but I know what it's saying. It's saying that the storm has passed and the garden is growing. and everything is exactly as it should be. I think about the letter one last time, the part where he said, "Don't make yourself small again." It's a simple instruction, but the hardest one to follow. We are taught from a young age to fit into the boxes people build for us. We are taught that our value is determined by how well we serve the interests of the powerful. But the truth is, the only person who can define your size is you. I didn't just survive my family, I transcended them. I didn't just inherit a fortune, I created a future. And as the darkness finally settles over the coast, I feel a deep, abiding peace. I am not a ghost in a mansion. I am a woman in a home. I am not a shadow. I am the light, and for the first time in all my many years, I don't have to say a word for the world to know I'm here. The coin is cold in my hand, but my heart is warm. The legacy continues, not in the noise, but in the marrow of the earth, in the roots of the trees, and in the quiet, steady beating of a heart that refuses to be diminished. This is the story of how $50 became a life, how a dismissal became an invitation, and how a quiet girl found her voice in the one place no one else thought to look. It's a story for anyone who's ever been told they're not enough. You are. You always were. You just need to check the rim of the coin. The final chapter of any life isn't written in the will. It's written in the days that follow. My days have been full of purpose, of love, and of the kind of quiet joy that doesn't need to be shouted from the rooftops. I have built my life on the foundation Silas Thorne gave me, and I have watched that foundation hold firm against every storm dot as I watch the last sliver of the moon rise over the ocean. Feel no bitterness, only a profound sense of clarity. They got what they wanted, but I got what I needed. And in the end, that is the most important distinction of all. Good night, Grandpa. I hope you're watching. I hope you see the garden. I hope you see the clinics and the parks and the schools. I hope you see Maya and little Silas, but and I think if you were here, you'd agree that I've become exactly who I was meant to be. The silver dollar sparkles one last time in the moonlight before I slip it back into its pouch. It's time to go inside. The air is getting cold, but the house is warm. And in the morning, there will be more work to do, more seeds to plant, and more quiet to listen to. And that, my friends, is all anyone can ever really ask for every once. In a while, I imagine what would have happened if Julian had been the one to get the coin. He would have looked at it with contempt, perhaps tossed it onto the lawyer's desk, or given it to a valet as a sarcastic tip. He would never have looked at the rim. He would never have felt the weight. He would have seen only the $50, not the opportunity. That thought always makes me realize that the inheritance was never the assets themselves. It was the discernment to find them. The verification sequence wasn't just for the bank. It was a test of my attention, my patience, and my faith in the man who raised me, Dot. And as I look back on the decades since that day in the law office, I see that every challenge I faced was just another version of that silver coin. Every time someone tried to diminish me, every time a project seemed impossible, every time my family tried to claw their way back into my life, I had to look for the rim. I had to look for the hidden truth, the secret leverage, the quiet path forward. My life has been a series of small, deliberate choices that added up to a monumental shift. It's like the way my grandfather built his empire, one ship, one contract, one honest deal at a time. He knew that greatness isn't an event, it's a habit. And he spent his final years instilling that habit in me, even when I didn't know he was doing it. I remember a time when Maya was struggling with a decision in her medical practice. She was being pressured by a large pharmaceutical company to endorse a product she didn't believe in. They were offering her an incredible amount of money, more than enough to fund 5 new clinics. She came to me, exhausted and torn. "Think about the coin, Maya," I told her. She looked at me, her eyes tired but sharp. I know, Mom. The money is just the invitation, but it's so much good I could do with it. But at what cost to your foundation? I asked. If you build your clinics on a compromise, the walls will always be shaky. Look for the rim. What are they not telling you? Why do they need your name specifically? She went back, did her research, and found that the company was suppressing data about side effects. She didn't just refuse their offer, she exposed the data. It cost her the clinics in the short term, but it built a level of trust with her patients and the medical community that no amount of money could buy. A year later, a private donor who had followed the story gave her twice as much money as the pharmaceutical company had offered, with no strings attached. That was the Thorn legacy in action. That was the silver dollar at work.now. As I sit here in the twilight of my own life, I realized that the most beautiful thing about the $50 was that it was enough. It was enough to start the journey. It was enough to prove a point. And it was enough to change the world, one quiet act at a time. I am ready for the quiet now. I am not afraid of it, just as Silas wasn't, because I know that when I go, I'm leaving behind a world that is just a little bit better, a little bit kinder, and a little bit more aware of the things that are hidden in plain sight. So if you ever find yourself sitting at a long mahogany table, just take what you've been given, hold it up to the light, and look for the marks. The luckiest person in the room, the silver dollar is silent now, tucked away for the next generation. The garden is dreaming of spring, and I am content. It's not about the millions. It's about the $50 and the woman who knew exactly what to do with it. I can hear the waves outside, a steady, rhythmic pulse that sounds like the ticking of a clock or the beating of a heart or the turn of a brass key in a stainless steel lock. It's a good sound. It's the sound of a life well lived. And that's all any of us are really looking for, isn't it? A place where we are valued for our silence as much as our speech. A place where we can finally truly be ourselves. Thank you, Silas. I finally understand. I finally see. And I will never, ever make myself small again. The coin is in the pouch is in the drawer, and the drawer is closed. The story is told. And the rest, the rest is silence. Beautiful, powerful, holy silence.